Entrance to the mansion house is by this rather magnificent door with its lovely door knocker, purchased on the 1st of December 1749 for the price of 19 shillings. Once in the vestibule of the mansion house, there are two main doors that lead from it. On the right hand side is the door that leads to the mayor's parlour.
Good afternoon everybody, thank you for coming to see us at the mansion house. This is the mayor's parlour, the front room that is for the mayor. I use this on occasions for different events. We entertain people who come to Doncaster and enjoy company with different people. The chains that I'm wearing are the original chains from back in 1760s when they were first purchased, and I am very honoured to be able to wear them for this civic year. I started my civic year on the 13th of May, and it is a full year. So the next AGM of the council in May next year is when my term will end. I'm really enjoying the year. We do lots of events and talk to lots of people, go to different areas and see people from different areas and different experience, and it gives me the experience of seeing all these different people. The mayor's parlour is now, as it's been for quite a while, very similar. We've got a lovely table that will seat 12 for a meal. We have actually had a nice meal here with friends, and it's a lovely area to actually have an event in and to entertain people. I really enjoy being the Mayor of Doncaster. It was an honour to be given this role at the AGM of Council, where all the councillors in Doncaster voted and put me to this office. The people of Doncaster vote for councillors in Doncaster, and we also have an elected mayor. So the elected mayor looks after all of the political aspects of Doncaster, whereas the role of the mayor is to chair council, and also it is an ambassadorial role to go to different places and talk to different people, go to events and engage with people in their area rather than for them to come into Doncaster, which is really good. We go out to see people whose birthday it is. We've been to a couple of 101 birthdays, and we've been to 103rd birthday, and it's lovely to see those people, and surprisingly they have been extremely mobile and very, very well in their own homes even. So it's fantastic to see that people can live to that age and live well, and I hope I do as well. The role of civic mayor is to chair full council. It is an apolitical role, so I don't get involved in the political aspects of council business, although I do vote in council meetings, and I am still a councillor for Doncaster Council and perform my role in my ward. And I live in Kirksandall, and the ward includes Edenthorpe. The Electoral Commission came to Doncaster and they made their recommendations. Previously, Doncaster Council was made up of 63 councillors, 3 councillors in each ward. They came in and they changed boundaries, and there are now 55 councillors in Doncaster. And one of the changes that they've actually instituted is, instead of council having election for 3 years, they now do one election which encompasses everybody in the council, including the elected mayor. So in 2017, all councillors will be up for election, and the elected mayor as well. So we don't know how that's going to work. We'll watch this space. I'm really honoured to be the Civic Mayor of Doncaster. It's a huge pleasure. We do lots of events that I, as a factory worker, would never have been able to do. I still work full-time in the factory. I do council work as and when I can, and the rest of the time is now taken up with civic engagements as well. Some lovely events we go to, and we really enjoy going to those. The question of living in the mansion house is one that's been asked fairly regularly. The last person who lived in the mansion house, it was over 100 years ago, and it was a councillor Tubey, and he didn't like living in the town, and he went back to his caravan just to the north of Doncaster. I, as a preference, it wouldn't work for me. I don't want to live in the mansion house. The London mansion house is lived in by the Mayor of London, but the city centre living is not right for me because I use a motor car, and there is nowhere around here to park it, so it would cause more problems, and it's not one of those things that I would do. But also, people of Doncaster would think of it as a grace and favour, and they wouldn't like it. So for all those reasons, it's not something that I would want to do. In the future, the building needs a lot of work doing to it. It's just had about £500,000 spent on it, and it looks magnificent. But the problem is it needs another at least £5 million spending on it to get it up to a standard that we could use on a regular basis. There is no chance of getting that sort of money to do the work. And then when all the work's done, the place would look exactly the same as it looks now. So I hope that that work is done, and I hope that it's done to the standard that's required, because this building is a magnificent building, and I hope that it stays here for many more years to come and is looked after for all those years, and hopefully the citizens of Doncaster can actually come in and see it on a more regular basis, since it's not been the council chamber for 4 years now. It was 2012 when we vacated and moved into the civic building. The place is now not well used. I still use it on a regular basis in here, and we have open days for people to come in, but there's no regular engagements for the building, and I would like to see more people use it, maybe for meetings, for conferences. They've started doing some of the weddings, and hopefully the building as it is now will be used for those sort of things in the future, but I just hope that it's used more. As you can see, the robes there are the ceremonial robes that are worn at various occasions. They're quite heavy, and during the winter they're lovely and warm, but obviously during the summer it's extremely warm. Yeah. They are the original ones. It looks so grand as well, and there are other ones for other civic dignitaries around the borough and around the country. And we also have a hat which is worn, and it's unusual to have a hat like that, but It looks really good. So there's the regalia, which includes the chains. 1760 these were commissioned. We still have the receipt for them, and they're obviously that old that they haven't got hallmarks on them, but they are nice and fine, whereas a lot of the other Civic mares have got chains which are chain links and different types. And the Lady Mayoress has this one which is from the 1900s, so they look very nice as well. And the little badge in the middle is the coat of arms of Doncaster. So they are what the mayor wears to wherever they go. The elected mayor doesn't wear any chains.
My name's Paul Lawson. I am the Civic Mayor's officer, mace bearer and chauffeur. Part of my ceremonial duties with the Civic Mayor is mace bearers. The mace I am bearing is a 1683 mace donated by the Cook family of Bentley. It is Charles II, it has a Charles II seal on its crown. The mace originally was a medieval weapon, and people used it as a bodyguard for gentry. Since the medieval times, it has slowly become a symbol of authority, and where it is part of the mayor's insignia, and therefore where the mace is, the mayor will be.
Every year when the Civic Mayor comes into office, they support a charity for the year. This year I've chosen the Yorkshire Air Ambulance, and we've got a lovely little air ambulance there. And the second charity is Aurora. Aurora cares for people with cancer and also their families. So I'll be raising some money towards Aurora and the air ambulance this year. Different mayors have different charities. We try not to do the same charity year after year, so that more people can benefit in different areas.
Whilst on the left is the room that is commonly called now the front committee room. Doncaster Mansion House is one of 3 mansion houses in the country. In fact, it is the youngest, the most recent to be built. And in the eyes and memories of most people, it is associated with local politics. But in fact, it was erected for hospitality only, largely due to the road just outside the Mansion House, which we call the High Street, but which in fact was part of the Great North Road. This meant that any traffic moving north, south, across the country had to pass through Doncaster. And because journeys were so slow in those days, it meant that people stayed overnight. When important people stayed overnight, the corporation felt they had a responsibility to entertain them in some way or other and had no building in which to do it. And so they decided that a mansion house would be built. Things moved rather slowly, but in the 1730s the land was bought for £170, and then they started to search for an architect. And the architect they found was an up-and-coming one by the name of James Payne, who was already doing work at other places in the locality. He set to work and he designed a rather elaborate building that was a little bit beyond the financial capability of the corporation to pay for. But when it was slimmed down, eventually it was built at a cost of a little over £4,500. And when all the furnishings and things were put into the mansion house, it came up for about £8,000. Eventually, it was ready for opening, and the grand opening took place on the 15th of April, 1748. We are now in what is called the front committee room of the mansion house, but back in the days when the mansion house was newly occupied, it was simply one of 3 downstairs rooms described as the entertainment for gentlemen. Now, the there was no clearer plans, no clearer indication really as to what the rooms were used for. And as far as the things that are in the mansion house, the furnishings, etc., most of them do not date from that time. This table in front of me is around about 1850. And we think this was the table at which the mayor and a couple of supporting magistrates would sit in the early days before the Guildhall was built each Monday morning, and the miscreants would be brought in front of them for treatment. Some of them could be dealt with there and then, some of them with more serious accusations laid against them would be held over for the proper assizes. One of the things that is in the mansion house, however, in fact there are several of them to be honest, that dates more or less from that time, are these clocks. Clocks like this one, made by a local clockmaker, George Halifax. There are around about 14 clocks in the mansion house, and he was responsible for about half of them, I think, roughly speaking. George Halifax became a free man of the town, he became a councillor and then an alderman, and eventually Mayor of Doncaster. Now these clocks are sometimes called Parliament clocks and sometimes called tavern clocks. The tavern clocks is pretty obvious the reason for that. They were erected in taverns, and customers for the stagecoach would go in there to see what time their stage was coming. They're called Parliament clocks because at one time the politicians of the day decided it would be a good idea to put a tax on clocks, and they did that. It was called Parliament clocks, but eventually the whole enterprise folded within a matter of months, but still the name Parliament clock remains. The mayors of Doncaster are listed from 1493, but obviously the mayors associated with this building only start from the middle of the 18th century. And of the mayors, the earliest mayors that there were around, the only portrait in this room is that one there. And that is Frederick Fisher, who was mayor of Doncaster in 1847. He is a little interesting because before he was mayor, he was town clerk, and it was one of his responsibilities as town clerk to devise the address that the corporation would give to the Duke of Wellington on receiving the freedom of the borough of Doncaster. He also had to arrange for the opening of a brand new street in Doncaster, which we all know as Cleveland Street. He lost his job in 1835 as a result of the Municipal Corporations Act. He then came back and became a councillor, worked up and became Mayor of Doncaster. He lived at Westfield House in Balby, and eventually, after his death and his family had lived there for a few years, the corporation took it over, and it is now known to residents of Balby as Westfield Park. There was rather a curious incident took place virtually 20 years after Frederick was mayor with Henry Woodmansey. And Henry Woodmansey was a jeweller. In fact, he didn't have far to come to the mansion house because his place of work was just across the road at the junction to Scott Lane. That was the jewellers at the time. And when he was mayor of Doncaster for his year of service, when it came round to the 1st of October 1867, he unfortunately became the second mayor of Doncaster to die on the premises. Henry, on that particular day, had had a rather busy day. He'd been in court for several hours, and he had to come back at night because the ladies of Doncaster, who had been fundraising to pay for a new hospital, or a hospital, which actually of course isn't there now, had achieved their target, and he wanted to praise them for it, and so a dance had been put on for the ladies, and they were dancing in the mansion house quite late on actually in the evening, and he felt he ought to come and show his face and congratulate them for their efforts. He did this. He passed through the salon, he went on to the ballroom, smiling at everybody, having a few words here, there and everywhere. And then just as they were striking up for the dance, a Sir Roger de Coverley dance, he decided he was going home. He set off down the stairs which lead from the landing just outside the ballroom, and he was on the wall side as he went down the stairs, holding the hand or the arm of another gentleman, when he got about 5 or 6 steps down and he decided he was going to stay after all. So he turned and he said, "I think I'll just stay," and for whatever reason he lost his footing and the pair of them fell down onto the balcony. He was unconscious, he got quite a cut to his head, and of course there was a flurry of activity as all the ladies come out. "The mayor's fallen, the mayor's fallen." They all come out, rushing out of the ballroom. He's carried down to the mayor's parlour and he manages to survive until just about the afternoon of the following day. They carried out a sort of bit of an operation on him to try to save his life in the mayor's parlour, but it was to no avail and he died. What followed then was quite typical of other mayors that died either in office or out of office. There was a rather splendid Victorian funeral. The bells of St George's tolled throughout the time of the funeral. The shops shut, the crowds outside up High Street and all the way to Hyde Park Cemetery were 4 deep as the corporation, the mayor and the councillors in all their regalia with the mace draped in black trooped on the way to the cemetery. And he has a rather splendid grave there in Hyde Park Cemetery. Moving on a little bit further, we come to a mayor called Thomas Abbott. Now, Thomas Abbott was mayor in 1892. He'd been born in 1825 in the village of Everton, just outside Bawtry. He had no education at all, and when he was of working age 9 that was actually, he started to work in the fields. He got a place working near Stansell, just near Wadworth. And then later he tried quarry work for a year, but it wasn't to his liking. And then he got a job working in what was a growth industry at the time, working for the Yorkshire Railway Company, setting down the new railway lines. He wasn't very keen on it, I don't think, but he did save his money. He saw around him lots of other navvies, which I suppose they were, spending their money perhaps on drink, generally not saving, and he thought he didn't want to be like that, and so he saved money. And before long he'd amassed, unbelievably, the good sum of £20. Now, he didn't like working on the railway and living in his lodgings with £20, so he decided he would take it to his mother for safekeeping. Now, he did visit home occasionally, and what he usually did was he came to Doncaster, hoping then he could catch a lift to Everton. Unfortunately, on one occasion, there was no lift available. He arrived late at night. It didn't stop him. He just walked to Everton, something perhaps that people might think more than once about these days. Anyway, he took his £20 to his mother and instructed her under no circumstances was she to tell anybody that she got it in the house. She was to hide it, but she mustn't tell anybody. So his mother dutifully hid it, but less dutifully felt the need to tell people about her success, how young Thomas was doing very well for himself and had saved £20. It soon became quite common knowledge, although of course everybody she told, she got them to say that they wouldn't tell anybody else. And then one Sunday, when she went to church, people broke in. They broke in very skillfully. They took the entire window out, got into the house, ransacked it looking for the £20, and although she may have not kept quiet about her son's success, she'd obviously hidden the money well and it wasn't found. When he discovered what had happened, Thomas thought the best thing was not to leave the £20 with his mother, and so he took it to the bank to deposit in the bank. And the bank manager said, "I'm very sorry, we can't take such a large sum as £20. What I think you ought to do is invest it, and I would like to recommend the South Yorkshire Railway Company, the very company that Thomas had worked for." He did invest it, and he was quite a parsimonious fellow. He didn't spend money willy-nilly, and he lived just round the corner from the mansion house at 8 Priory Place. People used to say to him, "You know, Thomas, you've worked very hard for this money, why don't you spend it and enjoy it?" And he would reply, "If when other people spend it, they get as much enjoyment out of it as I have out of saving it, then I shall be satisfied." This room is the ladies' withdrawing room. When there was a splendid ball or some such occasion on in the ballroom, at some point in the proceedings, somebody would say, "Ladies, I think we should withdraw," and the ladies would come in here to sip tea and have lady talk, while the gentlemen went off to have brandy and cigars in the card room. That was the principal reason for this room, certainly one for entertainment. There is a connection in here slightly with Queen Victoria. When she was a princess, Queen Victoria, then a princess as I've just said, visited Doncaster twice within 10 days. First of all, it was on the 5th of September 1835 when she was on her way from down south to a music festival in York. And as she passed past the very doors of the mansion house, she wrote in her diary on that day, "Doncaster is a pretty little town." She must have liked it enough because she returned 10 days later, this time while she was staying with the Earl Fitzwilliam at Wentworth House. And as the corporation knew that she was coming and she was a princess, they arranged for her to stop on her travels somewhere in Doncaster, somewhere what is now Waterdale, so that they could go and present an address to her. She no doubt thought it something of an inconvenience, but that was probably one of the things that royal princesses had to put up with. She did return as Queen to Doncaster, but she didn't come into the mansion house. She came to Doncaster on Wednesday, the 17th of August 1851. It was her first time that she'd visited King's Cross Station, and it took her 5 hours to reach Doncaster. That was largely due to the fact that the train had to keep stopping to take on water, and every time it stopped at a station, she'd found the platform full of local councillors who insisted on making speeches and brass bands playing. Anyway, when she arrived in Doncaster, she stayed at what was then called the Angel Hotel, which was more or less on the site of where Boots is today. And she didn't come out of her place there until the following day when she was back in the train and on her way to Balmoral. A few years later, about 10 years later, when Prince Albert died, the corporation bought these chairs with the black on the back for mourning as a sort of way of remembering Prince Albert, who Queen Victoria, of course, as everyone knows, went in for a period of long mourning for him. The pictures on the wall, there are a couple that may be of interest. One over there is a picture of Sarah Siddons, who was an actress who specialised in tragedy plays. In fact, her life was something of a tragedy as well. And on the right here is the Reverend Sanford, who rejoices in the full name of Folliot George Sanford. He was the vicar of St George's for a long time, and eventually, when Sanford Road was built at Balby, they named it after him. The sad story that I think of the Reverend Sanford is when he received news of the death of his son in the First World War. It was brought to him not in the usual way by a telegram, but by a fellow officer who arrived at the vicarage to tell him, bringing as proof his son's wristwatch. This is the grand room, or the ballroom as we call it now, and this was the place that the rich people and the people of standing in society in the late 18th century would come to assemble for dining and dancing. These were affairs that often went on long into the night, but in these rather nice surroundings, they would enjoy themselves. Usually, the tablets on the wall, initially at least, had no portraits in them. And then in 1804, the first one arrived. It was the portrait of George III, and naturally it had to be put into place in the mansion house. After that, others were added over the years. When people came here to dance, they naturally needed music, and that was provided by the minstrels who went into the minstrels' gallery. They went up there because it wasn't thought appropriate that minstrels, that is, members of the serving classes, should come face to face with those who were residents, who lived in the mini stately homes around Doncaster, and sometimes the especially good stately homes. It wasn't thought they should meet up with them socially, so they had to get up with play their music and then leave, virtually only being heard and not seen. The assemblies with the dancing and the dining often went on for a long time, with many courses and many toasts being drunk. And at some point, it was quite practice at that time for the hostess to suggest that the ladies should withdraw and go into another room, whilst the gentlemen went over there to the salon to enjoy their brandy and cigars. In 1806, this room, the dining room, was ready for the ladies and gentlemen of Doncaster and the people surrounding Doncaster of importance to come here to dine. It was crucial that it was ready by 1806 because that was the year that Doncaster was to be visited at the time of the St. Leger by two future kings of England at the same time, the future George IV and the future William IV. They both came to Doncaster, and no doubt they hoped that they would use this particular room. After nearly 40, 50 years of the old arrangements for dining, with the gentlemen and ladies separating, now it was no longer necessary. They would come into here to dine. Later, the ladies thought it was a little bit inconvenient, them having to walk all the way around from their waiting room into here, and so a gallery was established, which we'll talk about later. As far as this room is concerned, it is slightly smaller than the ballroom, but not really noticeably so, and indeed it's got its own gallery up there. After about 50 years, certainly by the time that Queen Victoria came to the throne, things had changed. The fashion for the larger assemblies with their dancing and the dining had faded a little bit. It did no longer attracted people in the same way, and the fashion dictated that they had to find somewhere else to entertain themselves. There was a bit of a gap for 50 years or so, and then maybe a little bit more than that, and then after the First World War, Doncaster Council, that had previously met elsewhere, decided that they would like to meet in this room, and this room became the council chamber. Initially, it was said that it would only become the council chamber for the duration of the First World War, but in fact the council stayed here somewhat longer, eventually moving out to Waterdale in 2013.